According to the voting, the D-backs are loaded with MVP talent. Just another sign that Mike Hazen and the front office have to start getting aggressive and building around this young core.
You are Locked On Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Jace Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jace case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50 plus infections. Get yours today at jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. I'm Millard Thomas, host of this wonderful podcast. I'm a multimedia journalist and I'm a graphic designer, so please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com, to see all of my latest work. I've been hosting this podcast since 2020, and now the D-backs face one of their biggest off seasons in franchise history on the heels of a World Series trip. And for today's podcast, we'll be talking about X factors for the D-backs in 2024, tier 2 trade candidates that the D-backs should consider targeting. And to start in segment number 1, we'll talk about the MVP voting because there were some D-backs that got some votes in today's poll. I first want to say thank you for making Locked On Diamondbacks your first listen every day. You guys are the true MVP. Continue to listen wherever you stream podcast platforms. Follow us on YouTube, Locked On Diamondbacks, and please hit a little follow button on both Twitter and Instagram to the Locked On Diamondbacks show handle. But now let's talk about the MVP voting pertaining to the Arizona Diamondbacks, because MLB announced Shohei Ohtani and Ronald Acuna Jr. both unanimous MVPs. Crazy stuff. Of course, Acuna Jr., 40 home runs, 70 stolen bases, and a whole lot of black on his baseball reference. And then Ohtani, just casually the greatest baseball player we've ever seen, elite pitcher, elite position player, and arguably would be the best at both if he only did one or the other. And he still might be the best at both when he is doing both. So those two guys won the MVP, but that's not what we care about on the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. What we care about is the D-backs players, because when you look at the voting breakdown, the first thing that stood out to you is Corbin Carroll finished 5th in MVP voting. Let me remind everyone, I know all the D-backs fans who are listening to this podcast already know, but in case you forgot, in case you're not a D-backs fan and you're just casually listening in, Corbin Carroll was a rookie this season. One rookie of the year, of course, had 25 home runs, 50 plus stolen bases, the first time ever for a rookie. And you look at the numbers, not a surprise to see how he, finished as high as 5th in the MVP voting. Not a shock at all to any D-backs fans or any baseball fan for that matter, because I think if you watch baseball religiously, if you watch enough D-backs games, like, everyone knows Corbin Carroll is that guy. Sub 20% K rate, really solid hard contact numbers, solid numbers in the clutch, really good slash line. He has all the traditional stats with run scoring, led the league in triples, home runs, steals. Very good defender as well. Corbin Carroll, in his first season with the D-backs, displayed every tool imaginable and exceeded all expectations that we had. Because like I said on yesterday's podcast, prospects are just such a crapshoot, such a roll of the dice. Corbin Carroll was considered a can't-miss guy, but how many can't-miss prospects are missed on all the time, right? But Corbin Carroll, so smart for Mike Hazen to sign him to that long-term extension before the season started, because considering he just won Rookie of the Year unanimously and finished 5th in MVP voting, that contract is going to look like a steal going forward. Corbin Carroll is on one of the best contracts in Major League Baseball. So smart by Mike Hazen and the front office to lock him up for the foreseeable future. Corbin Carroll's locked up until the age of 30. So we are getting the best prime years from Corbin Carroll. And then if you look a little bit farther down the MVP voting list, you know who else got a vote? They only got one 10th place vote. but Zach Gallen got 1 vote. Gallen, I was a little bit surprised to see him even named a Cy Young finalist with how he finished the season. But he apparently has so much love from the media, more than I even realized. They thought he was good enough to be considered a top 10 MVP vote getter. At least that's what one voter thought. Gallen did have himself a pretty good season. Like I said on yesterday's podcast, he was like top 7 in most traditional stats. He was like top 3 in innings pitched and strikeouts. Whip was good. ERA was good. Walks per 9, strikeouts per 9. Like he was like top 10, top 7 in most categories, top 5, top 3. I just didn't think with the way he finished the year, it was deserving of an MVP because when your team is struggling the most and your ace is out there not delivering the kind of start you need to end the slump, it's going to be hard for me to consider you an MVP, but did have himself a great season. And I do like the fact that he was at least recognized by the baseball media. And then the real dime in the rough cut, you really have to know your baseball to have given this guy a vote because, of course, you as D-backs fans, some D-backs fans would have told you he was the MVP, or at least if you didn't have Corbin Carroll, he would have been the MVP of the D-backs, the team MVP, Christian Walker. So the fact that someone actually gave him a 10th place vote, that person knows ball. Christian Walker had himself a very good season, 800 plus OPS, 30 plus home runs, over 100 RBIs, double digit stolen bases, and once again, the best defense at first base in Major League Baseball. Below 20% K rate, does not strike out a ton. Elite hard contact stats. Need him better with runners in scoring position, but Christian Walker is a stud, and the D-backs ended up having 3 players finish with MVP votes, the most since 2017. I just love the fact that the D-backs players are getting recognized. D-backs have themselves a fine season where they make it to the postseason in the regular season, 84 wins. You still have a negative run differential, but even with all that being said, D-backs still had 3 players to garnish votes in the MVP voting. I just thought that was very impressive that the D-backs were recognized for their accomplishments. And honestly, I want to give a little bit of credit to Mike Hazen because, like a Torey Lovello, he's someone that I've had an up and down relationship with during his time with the D-backs. There's been a lot of moves, a lot of trades, a lot of signings that I've disagreed with Mike Hazen, but I want to give him a little bit of credit right now for the team that he has built, for discovering Corbin Carroll, drafting him. Christian Walker was backing up Chris Davis in Baltimore. This guy looked like he was going to be out of Major League Baseball. D-backs picked him up. And then, of course, can't forget Zach Gallen. That was a fantastic and kind of ballsy trade by Mike Hazen. Trading your top prospect, Jazz Chisholm, for Zach Gallen was a little bit of a risky move because you typically don't see 1-for-1 even deals in Major League Baseball or sports in general. And it kind of was a trade where it worked out for both teams. D-backs get a ace, and the Marlins get a star in the middle of the lineup. A perfect trade by Mike Hazen. He's done a great job of building this roster, of course. The Dalton Varsho trade netted a couple good pieces. The trade deadline moves were pretty good as well. Very proud of Mike Hazen for the moves he's made to build this roster up. So I want to give him credit, but I want Mike Hazen to know, despite the roster you built, a roster good enough to get to the World Series, you can't sit on your laurels. This D-backs team, with the amount of talent we have, you have to commit to winning and building a sustainable winner. And that starts this offseason. I want the D-backs to get aggressive this offseason, but this has to be the first offseason of the next 2 or 3 where you're going all in on building around the core you currently have. I don't want you to exhaust I don't want the D-backs to exhaust every move that they have up their sleeve this offseason because, again, this is not their strongest free agent class. But I don't want to see the D-backs just sit back and watch everybody else make moves, see other teams make really smart, savvy trades, see other teams sign players for maybe less than their projected dollar amount. We need to see the D-backs pull off some sneaky moves because if you're Mike Hazen, you've done a good job up until this point building this roster, but the job is not done yet, and you have to go out there this offseason and build a roster that could potentially get back to the World Series in 2024. And Mike Hazen, I can help you out a little bit because I got some tier 2 trade candidates that you could potentially target that I want to discuss in segment number 2. But before we get there, I first want to discuss Jace Medical because we've been spending a lot of time together. You and I, we get fired up together on wins and losses, who starts, who sits. I'm thankful for that connection we have. And today, I want our chat to be just a little bit more personal. I just learned they can get a 1-year supply on medications. You realize what that means? Bring on extended travel, bring on the next natural disaster or supply chain issue. You are covered, my friend. You don't have to worry about whether or not you can refill your generics for prescription. And this is possible because of our friends at Jace Medical. Go online right now at jacemedical.com to receive your 12-month supply on your daily medication. Remember to use promo code LOCKED ON at checkout for a discount as well. A verified customer had this to say about Jace. I am thankful for this service. Supply chain issues caused me to cut pills in half to have it. I ordered most of my daily meds with a year supply. I also ordered antibiotic kit. I feel secure now. Prices are lower than local pharmacies. I highly recommend this for everyone. If you or someone you love would get some peace of mind by having a year supply of any daily medication, go to jacemedical.com to see if it's offered to you. Remember to use promo code LOCKED ON for $20 off your purchase. Welcome back into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. If you like the content, please follow me on Twitter at CareerThomas24 for the personal account, or look up Locked On Diamondbacks both Twitter and Instagram for the podcast handle. But now let's talk about some tier 2 trade candidates. Yesterday we talked about some tier 1 trade candidates like a Juan Soto, a Corbin Burns. These are guys who have a little bit more risk to them. Maybe the salary is a problem. Maybe the health is a problem. Maybe they're just the decline of their career. There could be many, many reasons. So let's start with the top of my list. This is in no particular order, but the first guy that I want to talk about, who I do like, but you have to worry about his health and a little bit of his salary because I'm talking about Eloy Jimenez from the Chicago White Sox. I think he's a super talented player, but the problem is injuries have zapped his athleticism a little bit to the point where he's probably more of a DH at this point. You probably don't want to trust him too much in the outfield. The injuries I think have also started to play into his production as well. He's never played more than 122 games in a season. And this year, he played over 84 games for the first time since 2019 with 120 games played this year. So Eloy Jimenez definitely has some major red flags to him. He's owed 13 million next year. And he's owed like 16 and a half like the year after that. So he is owed a little bit of money in the mid-teens over the next couple years. Team option the year after that. And the question with Eloy is, can you keep him healthy? Because I think Eloy's a super talented guy. I think we all see that when he is playing. When Eloy is playing, I think we've all seen the kind of stuff that he can do, the kind of damage he can do. The problem is he never stays healthy enough. Big power bat, which is the reason I love him. Righty power bat could be the perfect DH to the Dbacks, could be what the Dbacks wanted Kyle Lewis to be this past season because it's a lot of the same things. Kyle Lewis could have been a power righty who dealt with injuries that was mostly going to play DH. Eloy Jimenez is basically the rich man's Kyle Lewis. And if the D-backs weren't afraid to take a chance on Kyle Lewis, they shouldn't be afraid to take a chance on Eloy Jimenez. I would say the price tag for what you have to give up, I would be cautious about that. These are these players I want to talk about today for this tier 2 exercise. These are players who I'm not going to break the bank for in terms of prospects given up or the deal I'll give them if we had to extend them. These are players I would like to add, but I wouldn't break the bank for. So I would like to add a Eloy Jimenez, but if they wanted like a Lawler, a Drew Jones, a Brandon Pfaadt, it's a big no for me. But I would give up someone interesting for Eloy Jimenez, just not someone elite. Next up, I got Brandon Drury, who is a little bit of a blast from the past, former top prospect for the D-backs. And the last couple years, Drury had just kind of found himself as a player in Major League Baseball, kind of just a floater out there for a while, solid with the D-backs those first couple years, but really didn't do anything post Arizona, kind of floated around baseball for a while. But 2022 and 2023, the last 2 years, he's been really good. Age 29 and age 30 have been the two best years of Drury's career. And last season, really solid year, over 800 OPS, almost 30 home runs, 87 ribbies, over 30 doubles. And this past year, over 30 doubles, 25 plus home runs, over 800 OPS. This is a guy that could play multiple positions in the infield, super versatile. I like the fact he's got some pop to him. Righty, could play second base, could play third base, could probably play shortstop if you need to, could play outfield. Like, this is someone that's versatile. You could play all over the diamond, and someone that's actually good at offense as well. This is like a good Ben Zobrist or good Brock Holt when they were at the peak of their powers. I wouldn't give him like a long-term deal. Wouldn't want to pay Brandon Drury a lot of money, but on a 2-year deal, I think he's only owed like another year of money on the books. Brandon Drury, I think, is a perfect 1 or 2 year rental for the Arizona Diamondbacks. I think he's a perfect bridge player to whatever youngster you want to put there in a couple years. But for the right now period, I think Brandon Drury is a pretty solid player. I think he could help the ceiling of this D-backs team. How about Christopher Morel? I think he's probably a little bit of a deeper cut. A little bit of a deeper cut. He's another guy like an Eloy, probably more of a DH. Really doesn't have a fit defensively, kind of like a Pavin Smith, first base or not first base, but a guy who positionally can't really be played at the position he wants to because defensively he's just not good enough to do it. But offensively, unlike a Pavin Smith, at least his bat is pretty effective because this guy hit 26 home runs in just 107 games, 500 plus slugging. Maybe he's more of a platoon DH guy. He's probably a guy that could play DH every single day. His splits are actually pretty good. Against righties, 800 OPS, and against lefties, 900 OPS. So you really don't have to sit him against righties or lefties. He could play every single day. The only issue is you probably don't want to play him a ton, defensively, but he is young. Maybe he can improve in that area. We'll see. But I like the fact that he's in his mid 20s on the up and up. I think he could be a potential offensive swing piece despite not really contributing much to the defense. If you want to talk about a guy who could contribute to both offense and defense, I'm a little scared of what the price tag to acquire this guy might be because I think he's a bigger name than production. But Randy Arozarena, I think, could be pretty interesting as a left fielder that could hold it down for some time. He's got a little pop, over 20 plus home runs the last 3 years. He also has between 20 and 30 stolen bases the last 3 years as well. So basically a 2020 guy near 800 OPS. I think Arozarena is good. I think he's just not a superstar. I don't think he's a star player. I think he's a very good player, but I don't think I don't know how much of a needle mover he is. Is he on the Juan Soto level, the Cody Bellinger level if the D-backs acquired those guys? No, but he is a little bit of a needle mover. I just don't think you could expect superstar expectations from a Arena. Don't expect the kind of dude that we saw in the postseason because that's a different animal. I think a Arena for 162 games in the regular season, pretty good. Like I said, 2020 would be good on the base pass, provides enough from the power department. Hard contact stats are there. Walks a good amount as well. Like, I think he's a good winning player that could move the needle a little bit. But like a Eloy or any of these other guys, I wouldn't want to break the bank for a Randy. So it just depends on the price tag that we would have to give up to acquire him. But I wouldn't mind adding him if if we let a Lourdes Gurriel and a Tommy Pham go, like trading for a Randy Arozarena to play defense with Corbin Carroll and Alek Thomas could be pretty elite. Then the last guy I want to discuss, who's coming off a terrible season, would be kind of a reclamation project for the D-backs, but I can't help that I love the way he looked in 2022, and I think he could be a bounce back candidate if we got him with Brent Strom. Alek Manoah of the Toronto Blue Jays. Absolutely atrocious season last year. 5.87 ERA, 1.74 whip, like 9.6 hits per nine, 6.1 walks per nine. Like everything was bad for Manoah. People probably saw him as a regression candidate entering 2023, but I'm still surprised at the level. Like Manoah in 2022, 2.24 ERA, almost 200 innings pitched, 180 strikeouts, a .992 whip. Like this dude was bananas across the board. Third in Cy Young voting, was also really good as a rookie as well. So those first 2 years that you saw from Manoah, he looked like a frontline elite ace. Last season, this past year, he looked atrocious. So which Manoah are you going to get? Can you bet on Manoah in the bounce back? He's still only 25 years of age. The D-backs have one of the best pitching coaches in Major League Baseball, and they already have Merrill Kelly and Zach Allen. And if Brandon Pfaadt's good next year, they have three starters locked into the rotation that you feel really good about. So it's not like Manoah would have to come in and be back to that 2022 level that we saw right away. Like he could work his way back into that, get with Brent Strom, and get back to the level of player that we saw in 2022. I would not be upset at all if the D-backs went out there and acquired him. Just don't break the bank to add a Manoah to your team. Now, I want to talk about which D-backs players could be huge swing pieces for them in 2024. But first, welcome back into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. Let's talk about which D-backs players I think could be major X factors for the 2024 season. As I have three players written down here who I think are very important to the D-backs' potential success next season. If these guys don't take a step forward in their development, or if they just plateau, the D-backs' chances of winning the division next year, having another deep postseason run, their ceiling just won't be as high if these guys don't take at least a little bit of a step forward. The first guy is Alek Thomas, who we've talked about on this podcast a lot. We, of course, all love Alek Thomas. We love what he just did this past postseason for the D-backs. Had some super clutch moments. I was at that NLCS game where he hit that big game tying home run into the pool. I was in right field. I was feet away from that home run. I love Alek Thomas, former top prospect for the D-backs, but he just flat out has to be better. The numbers that Alek Thomas are putting up right now just isn't good enough. And there are some good underlying numbers. Like the hard contact rate is not terrible for Alek Thomas. They're pretty solid. Doesn't strike out a ton, but he needs to draw more walks. He needs to be better with batting average on balls in play. Like there are some areas of his game that Alek Thomas definitely has to improve in. And for Alek Thomas, we need to see that bat come around. We know what he can do defensively. He was decent at home this past season, 257 average, 747 OPS at home, but on the road just couldn't hit at all. 558 OPS, 206 average, needs to be better on the road. If Alek Thomas, if that bat comes around, Alek Thomas does have all-star potential like we might have expected when he was coming up through the ranks. This guy has speed for days. He's underrated, I think, in terms of how fast he is, because when you look at sprint speed on StatCast, he is like top 15 among qualified players. And his ability to play center field, arguably the best in baseball. So he's got the speed component that could add runs, that could turn those singles into doubles, doubles into triples, the speed to track down fly balls, and the defensive instincts to do all that as well. It's the bat that needs to come around. The defense and the speed will at least keep him in the lineup and give him some sort of leash. But if his bat never comes around, Alek Thomas will never be taken serious as an above average major leaguer, as a long standing major leaguer, and the D-backs will never give him a big contract unless that bat comes around. And for the D-backs to take the next level next year, Alek Thomas is also going to have to take the next level. My second X factor for the D-backs next season He was already a major X factor for the D-backs this season, and some people would have told you he could have been the MVP of the D-backs this season. I'm talking about Gabriel Moreno. Already had himself a pretty good year with the D-backs, but I think there's more in the tank for Gabriel Moreno. I think this is a guy that could be a 300 hitter. I think this is a guy that could have an 800 OPS. I want to see more power. I want to see more speed from Gabriel Moreno. Like, he's already shown a good amount with his bat, with his contact to ball skills, his bat to ball skills. Like, I think he's a solid hitter. He crushed lefty pitching this past season. 352 average, 899 OPS against lefties, but he needs to improve against righties in that area. Very good at home, needs to be better on the road as well. But I love the fact that he was moved up to number 3 in the lineup in the postseason, because I thought that was the right spot to put him in the postseason with the way he was swinging the bat, the way he was coming through in the clutch. Gabriel Moreno was a very clutch player for the D-backs this year. 280 average with runners and scoring position. And it felt like he was coming through repeatedly in those high leverage moments for the D-backs throughout the season. And then, of course, like an Alec Thomas, elite defensive player, Gold Glove winner, throwing down dudes left and right, strong arm. Like, Gabriel Moreno can do so much for this D-backs team behind the plate. But like Alec Thomas, if he can do a little bit more at the dish, and he's nowhere near Alec Thomas in terms of their development process, in terms of hitting. Alec Thomas has a lot more to work on than a Gabriel Moreno. But Moreno can also get better at the hitting portion if his offense can improve just a little bit, just a tad, take another leap, get maybe into that JT Realmuto level of offensive player. Like, think about how much Realmuto does for that lineup for the Phillies, how much he extends that lineup. Think about all the great offensive catchers in the last decade to 20 years, the Posadas, the Joe Mauers, the Murphys, the Contreras. Like, when you have an offensive catcher, it makes your lineup so much more dangerous, because so many times the catcher is like when you had the pitcher instead of a DH. Like, it was just another person in your lineup that you just didn't trust to hit the ball. And Gabriel Moreno is someone that can do damage offensively. So if he can improve offensively next year, the D-back ceiling just goes that much higher. Then the final guy that I want to discuss, who was the D-backs X, you couldn't make the argument. He was the D-backs X factor this past postseason, Brandon Pfaadt. If Brandon Pfaadt doesn't pitch the way he did in the postseason, the D-backs do not go to the World Series. And if the D-backs want to go to the World Series next year and have a great regular season, Brandon Pfaadt needs to do what he did in the postseason and the regular season, because he was not good in the regular season. 5.72 ERA, 22 home runs allowed in 96 innings pitched, 10.2 hits per 9, 1.4 whip. Like, he was awful in the regular season. But the postseason is where you make your money, and that's where he made his money. Very good against the Dodgers, very good against the Phillies, and then, of course, solid against the Texas Rangers as well. Brandon Pfaadt, the numbers against him, opponents, righties, lefties, it does not matter the situation. 1 out, 2 outs, ahead of the count, behind the count, it does not matter. When you look at the regular season numbers, Brandon Pfaadt has to get better. He was good when he was ahead of the count, but outside of that, just was not good last year. Runners in scoring position, 320 average allowed, 1025 OPS allowed. Brandon Pfaadt has to get better in that situation. But high leverage moments, 213 average allowed. So when the moment is most pressurized, Brandon Pfaadt did come through in that moment. I do want the D-backs to sign another person for the rotation. I want Brandon Pfaadt to be the number 4 starter for the D-backs next year, but that doesn't mean he can't pitch like a frontline starter. And if Brandon Pfaadt in that number 4 spot pitches like a number 2, watch out, because the D-backs might take the NL West. Now, that's it for this edition of the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. Come back next week for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. Thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.